All right, welcome back to U.S. Vet Wealth Live, where we talk about all things military finance 2.0. Welcome back to another week, already at the end of May, which is mind-boggling to me, just how quickly the time has been going by this year, 2021 especially. But no, it's fun to get this thing off the ground, and already on episode 13 of this series, so that's pretty cool. But how was your weekend, man?
It was good. Like I told you, we went up to Deep Creek Lake in Maryland. It's my mom's 60th birthday, so we rented a big house up there, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, had a great time.
What part of Maryland's that?
It's like Western Maryland. It's literally there's a ski resort there called Wisp. I don't know if you've
Uh-uh.
ever heard of that, but it's almost at the border with West Virginia, which
Oh, so
it's
it's
like
in
an hour.
that weird section of Maryland that's like,
Yeah,
why is this part of Maryland? Okay.
yeah. So,
Is that near Harper's Ferry?
it is. It's really close, actually.
I uh I visited Harper's Ferry. I was a big Civil War nut when I was a kid, and we did a bake sale in junior high to raise money to give to the Civil War foundations at like Antietam and Gettysburg and stuff. And so we did a bunch of bake sales and raised like 200 bucks and got to do a summer trip to a couple battlefields and stuff. It was really fun. And one of the ones we went to was Harper's Ferry, and of course that's where the John Brown raid and all that kind of thing
Yep.
happened. That started the whole Civil War. It's a really fascinating place.
That's a big thing. West Virginia. That's part of the state history course. So we have to watch that. There's a video about some kid like walking through all the haunted. There's a lot of haunted stuff there in Harper's Ferry,
Oh,
and so
okay.
when we were kids, we had to watch all these different uh, stories about haunted stuff. There's like the one of this drummer boy where they were tossing him around in a room and they threw him out the window, and yeah, it was. I wish I could find it. I'll send it to you
It's funny how we
sometime.
tell some of these stories about like the battlefields in war, like it's a cartoon. The way we talk about it, honestly, and it's like no,
Hmm.
these are real people. This really happened, and
And I'll tell you that like the stuff that happened back then was pretty savage too.
oh,
Not that
it
we
was
don't. I mean, they didn't have IEDs and stuff like that back then, but
no,
it was nasty. It was a lot
uh,
more face to face.
yeah, it was a nasty life, and we're here living in luxury. You know, no matter what level of wealth you may or may not have, the today's topic is growth. If you think about the growth of the human experience, in just the last 100 years, like we don't even like to identify with the human being prior to, I guess, electricity being the norm in most cities. Completely different species. I gotta think that because this is this is getting nuts. We've evolved crazy. So we're living in this amazing time, and everybody's upset and afraid of pathogens.
Yeah, and well, it's funny. Like, every day is pretty much things have gotten better consistently in the world. And I know there's. I'm not saying there's not issues, but I mean, our issues are evolving along with
Right.
our society. Now we're not worried about getting eaten by wolves anymore, or
Well, imagine
most of us aren't.
yeah, or imagine just like, oh, that next city over, they decided to invade and kill us all. Like, geez,
Yeah,
I wish I
dang
would
it.
have seen that coming. We could have
Yeah,
put a rule in place and got everybody to agree with it.
yeah. It's, hey,
But
you guys can't attack us. That's against the law. Oh,
right.
my bad.
But no, anyways, I mean, it's all. I mean, perspective is important. I think perspective when we think about finances and building wealth and what it means to invest, um, is so important because the bottom line is we all want increase. That's just part of the human experience. You want to be you want better things. We're told not to envy, of course, but you can't help, even if you're not openly envious of things. You see where if it's not about having more stuff, we know we want to grow to be a better human. I would hope that's obviously who
Yeah,
we hope is listening to this show. It's not about greed. It's not about wealth. It's about increase. And we talk about growth. I think one of the contexts, I'd like to bring in this conversation is the growth of controlling time versus the growth of your balance sheet. on the numbers behind your name that are identified with your name. Now, the cool thing is, and this is where it plays off, is that type of growth can create more, not required, but it can help create more meaningful of the time, taking your time back type of growth. And I just think that's something that doesn't come up. It's something where someone said, "Oh, I never thought about it that way," and it's unfortunate. That's how I was for most of my life. Oh, I never thought about things that way, and that's, I think that's the shame behind it all, that we're just so willingly, give up that time to chase some other growth that isn't as meaningful as it can be if you just flip those two things around. So, but I know there's a lot of nuances into this, and we're probably just going to hit on the overview a little bit today of things we want to bring into our program.
Yeah, today's broad strokes. We'll dig a little bit more into these individual things as we go along. But I was going to say, I don't necessarily think that envy is a bad thing if it motivates you to do better. If it motivates you to improve your situation, I don't really view that as a bad thing. I don't, but the other piece of that is I don't you know, necessarily tie that to, making more money or having more stuff or whatever, but ultimately, working on improving your happiness. And I'll tell you, my deployment, I was in Afghanistan. Me, the other EOD guy, and the dog guy, we kind of had, we had our triad, and we just hung out together. We were always having a good time, whatever we were doing. And some of the other guys that were there with us, um, from the SEAL platoon I was attached to, they would just come up to us and say, like, we want to come hang out with you guys more. You guys always look like you're having a good time. And, and it was funny. So there was like that core group of a few of us. It was me, the other EOD guy, there was a SEAL dog handler and a Marine dog handler. And we just all hung out together. And the other guys would just be like, yeah, we always see you guys like hanging out, working out together, doing whatever, and it's like we want to we want to hang with you guys.
That's funny.
And so we were like, it was funny, like happiness was a magnet. Other people wanted to come to us because we all looked like we were always happy and having a good time. But yeah, so to talk about the subject of today is the overview of growth. And this is when a lot of people start investing, and I get this all the time from people who have no concept of what financial planning or advising or investing is. I always get the same, people are like, well, I want to start investing, but I don't know what stocks to buy. And I'm like, okay, well, there's your first problem right there, is you think that it's just about what stocks do I buy. And that's the complete wrong answer. That's looking at this through a very narrow aperture and not really understanding the full spectrum of this process, because it's not an event, it's a process. And so when I have somebody say, well, what stocks do you think I should buy? Or people who have been clients of mine for a while, and they're like, in the pandemic, they're like, hey, what companies do you think I should buy stock in right now so that I can make a lot? I'm like, we've been chatting for the last 2 years. Do you really think I'm going to tell you which stock I think you should buy? No, that's not what I do. Right. I do the aggregate strategy. That's my job.
Yeah, if you want stock picks, there's newsletter guys that'll happily charge you $150 a month to just tell you random stuff, and
yeah,
you can bank your life savings on that, and lots of
and
people do, and those people are millionaires.
and you'll probably
The
end
ones
up
writing the newsletters are millionaires, not the ones following the advice.
yeah, you'll probably end up disappointed because you didn't take care of all the other, an engine has more than one moving part, right? You got to take care of all of those. So I think, for me, the way that I look at this is the best way to open this conversation is when you're talking about growing assets or building something, you don't necessarily want to focus on how you put it in, but how do you take that money out later? Right. So there's always that debate of accumulation versus distribution. And this is what I don't like, all the radio talk show hosts and the gurus. I think I put this in the description. Those people aren't financial professionals. Those people are podcasters or talk show hosts or book authors. They're not actual advisors. One thing that I noticed with all of them is they only focus, they talk about the accumulation, like build up this big, huge thing of assets. And it's the problem with that is a lot of the times what they're telling you to do, you can't always use everything that they're talking about. If you're 50 years old and you've got $800,000 in a 401k, well, what if you decide that you don't want to work anymore for somebody else? What if you say, hey, you know what? I've done this for years. I want to start my own business, but I can't because I don't have any money to start it with. I could go it's like, well, you
I
do,
can't
you
use
have,
that money. It's for retirement. So therefore I have to
yeah.
work. I have to work another 10 years to be able to access my retirement money. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like, hey, that's a perfect example of or just paying your house off. It's like, yeah, your house is paid off. That's people get wrapped around this. Well, what's my net worth? Who cares what your net worth is if you can't use it? I got to come up with another term for that for people whose net worth is tied up in retirement accounts in their house, because
Yeah.
it's not really net worth. It's net, useless. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It's
Right.
like, yeah. So I, it just, it's mind boggling, right? Everybody focuses on the accumulation. Nobody thinks about the other side of that equation. Yeah. And, I think the other piece of that is it's sad that everybody thinks of distribution solely, as an issue with their retirement. So I don't know if you saw that article I sent you yesterday. They're working on a Secure Act 2.0, where they're trying to revamp the retirement process. One of the things that's pieces of legislation that's in there is they want to raise the age for taking required minimum distributions from 72 to 75.
Oh,
So that you
interesting.
don't have to take, I saw that and I was like, oh, I'm going to throw that in there and mention that. But I'm going to read into that a little bit more as that bill makes its way through. I think it got through committee in the House, and it's up for a vote soon. But regardless of that, let's get back on track. The whole thing of I don't necessarily just look at like how do you put it in, but how's that money going to come out later down the road?
Mm-hmm.
Like how are you going to use it from a strategic perspective? And then the other piece are all the risks that are involved with that. A lot of people don't really understand the risks that they're taking. And I think it's explained to them very poorly by all these talk show hosts and the not gurus. It's just terrible when I hear them talk about it. They say, well, the reason you don't want to do that is risk. And then the explanations that they give for risk are completely off the mark. They're not, they don't really, their discussions about risk are geared towards whatever product or service they're selling. It doesn't encompass, or it doesn't what's the word, include like your total risk, like from a big picture perspective. But some of the types of risks that are out there, you have your systematic risks, right? Those are the kind of the market driven risks, market associated, which you can never completely avoid. You can try to mitigate them as much as you want. You have your unsystematic risks, which are, that's kind of like government type stuff, that you can mitigate pretty heavily through diversification. The risks of fees, that's another big one that you and I talk about all the time with people, right? A 1.5% fee in a retirement account can end up costing you as much as 20 to 30% of your potential growth over a long period of time. So when I hear somebody say, no, you don't need to do this, you just go buy these, whatever, sales charges. That's another one too. The upfront sales charges, that's a big one. But when you do the math, when we talk about this stuff more in depth, I'll have some examples for you to show you like, hey, here's how much that 1.5% fee will cost you over 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Market risk. Obviously, that's a huge one. If you're 100% into the market, I've got some bad news for you. When it comes time for you to live off of that money, your chances of success of doing both, having enough income for you to live off of and never running out of money, especially when you throw into account like you're still paying fees on that, and you're possibly, maybe there's some taxes involved with that as you take that money out. Your chances are slim.
Hmm.
And, of course, the alternative to that is Social Security, but who knows if we'll be able to count on that. That was the other thing that was in that article that I sent you earlier. They were saying right now, current current at its current levels of funding, Social Security is only guaranteed, I think, until 2031. So we got about 10 years of them left right now, of them being able to guarantee that you'll be able to collect the current level of Social Security benefits. Um, Taxation, like I just said, that's another huge one too, because now, if I think I can live off of $50,000 a year starting in year one, well, I'll probably have to take about $65,000 out in order to get that same $50,000.
Hmm.
And now I have to look at, like, how much are they going to tax on my Social Security? Sequence of returns risk, that is probably a big one, right? Because we all know the market's going to go down, but none of us know when it's going to go down. And so if you're not prepared to handle that when it happens right at the very beginning of, whatever it is that you're planning for, that can have a pretty significant impact, on those later years, especially when you're looking at 20, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And then the other big one that I'm a big stickler on is the percentages versus dollar amounts. I see that all the time where people look at, like, well, what's the average rate of return? Well, I don't care what the average rate of return is, because that's just, the average of a group of numbers together. I look at, how much money did that make or not make me, right? If you look at, perfect example, last March, if you had $100,000 in your TSP and it lost 30,000, 30%, that's $30,000. Well, now in order to get that same, $30,000 back into my account, I don't need 30% returns. I need 43% returns. Right. So learning, like, hey, okay, what's the dollar amount? Not necessarily what the percentage is. Um, that's another big one that, people just don't seem to grasp. They look at percentages and they think, oh, okay, yeah, this is the return that I'm going to get. And a lot of these calculations that people do don't account for those average rate of returns. So when I show them, like, hey, here's the difference, over the last 20 years, 1999 to 2019, the average return, I think, was 6.25%. But your compound return is about 4.5%.
Hmm.
That's the performance that you're actually realizing. So people are under the assumption that they're making a lot more than they actually are. And, when I show them that example, they're like, oh, wow. And then you throw in the fees, that takes off another 0.5%. Like, realistically, if you threw money into the S&P 500 and let it sit there for 20 years over that period of time, 1999 to 2019, your compound average was only about 3.25%.
Yeah. So I'm gonna throw the risks up here because you went through a lot of them. So I want to make sure get an idea of the ones that we were talking about, and then of course we're going to these more of the detail and show some specifics on these in future
Yeah.
episodes,
And
right?
we didn't hit the inflation one too, but that's another big one that I hate with a lot of these online calculators for retirement. They say, oh, you need $40,000 a year. Well, they're planning on you having $40,000 a year for the rest of your life. Well, the problem with that is, $40,000 today, 20 years from now, is going to have the same buying power as $25,000.
Right.
It's going, so you have to actually increase that every year.
And so that's so really it's these risks that do exist in the current system. They don't have to exist. The way that it's couched to everybody out there when it comes to saving for retirement, what most of the financial advisors are going to tell you, or anybody that's telling you to save money for your future, they're accounting for these things in the sense that, well, you got to invest for growth. And so everybody's chasing growth. And this is what the bankers and investment bankers and the Wall Street guys have brainwashed everybody into believing with their marketing, is because the only people that guarantee a benefit from this system are the bankers, are the investment, the Wall Street type people, and to some extent, most of the broker dealer investment advisory firms out there, because they're justifying all these risks for you to work with them. And so that they can justify charging the fees, like, oh, we're going to help you avoid these, but don't worry, we'll get growth, assuming the stock market goes up, which none of these people have any control over, but we're still going to collect our fees all along, and then tell a story around that. So that's, our whole point of bringing this all up, is the reason they show all this stuff is to make it sound scary. Hey, you need some expert who's looking at this every day. They're not, by the way. And about, how do we manage your assets so you can get that rate of return, so you can get the growth you need to have enough money at retirement, which says nothing about inflation to the real inflation. So there's real inflation, there's nominal inflation, just like there is with the average rate of return versus the real rate of return. So these are very, very powerful concepts. The coolest thing to know about all this stuff is you can totally avoid it with the war chest strategy. That's why we created it. It's nice to, because bottom line is we have to get growth, because they screwed it up. I mean, right now with the inflation that's coming, maybe none of this stuff even matters at that point. But I mean, we're going to have so much inflation. We have always had inflation. If you just look at the cost of houses 20, 30, 40 years ago, do we think that's a good thing? We think it's a good thing that home values have gone up, just so the people, all the baby boomers who bought their houses when they were super cheap, they get the profits. And yet the millennials, the reason they can't buy houses is because the houses prices have skyrocketed. That's not a good thing. So we have a bunch of these people basically living as roommates and stuff, not properly taking control of answering these types of questions for their own personal financial situation. So that, again, that's why the war chest strategy is so powerful. It just takes all this stuff off the table, and then you can go focus on really getting that time back, which we talked about at the beginning. So no, I
Yeah.
think the risks, reframing the risks, is the most important thing we do at US Vet Wealth. And so that's why I want to hit on the risks a little bit extra. I'm going to bring this up again, just to realize these things need to be, you may need to make aware of them, but putting together a portfolio, do I need to buy gold or not? I saw a video of Dave Ramsey this morning. Somebody had asked about the hyperinflation and said, should I buy gold? And Dave's like, I'm not going to tell you to buy gold. Of course not. And I'm not saying that either, but to discredit an entire asset class at this point, at this stage in the game, is kind of interesting. That one of the main gurus would say, "Oh no, of course, just stay tried and true. Just keep buying mutual funds. The stock market will work out one way. Don't worry about all the fees and stuff. That's justified." It's like, okay, great. That's how it always was, and it probably would work out in the long run eventually, anyways. Or you can just avoid it altogether and get on with your life and
Well, again,
really,
too, like
really
that's
participate.
not really advice. That's just somebody who has no, confidence in their ability to learn and make decisions for themselves,
Yeah.
kind of putting the onus on somebody else who's just like, all right, I'm just going to do these minimal things here that I can not get myself in trouble with, and people will pay me a lot of money to tell them to do this stuff.
Right.
I mean, you don't need him to tell you like what you should or shouldn't buy. But that's a great point, because that was my last little talking point. There was diversification. What does diversification actually mean? I couldn't tell you how many times I have talked to somebody and they show me like their investments, and they say, "Well, yeah, I'm pretty well diversified. I got some stuff at Schwab. I have some stuff at Edward Jones, and I have some stuff at Ameritrade and Fidelity and Vanguard." And then I go look at what they have, and there's you look at the correlation. It's of everything they have. It's probably above 60%. They're essentially invested in the same thing through these 5 different companies. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I got some bad news for you. You're not
Well,
as well diversified as you think.
even the way that diversification has been couched in the rules of the College of Financial Planning, or certified, or the CFP guidelines, they act that diversification within the stock market, within a portfolio of financial vehicles, is true diversification, is the lie. That's the scam. is just saying, oh no, as long as you have a little bit of all the stocks, you're diversified. It's like, man, that's not what diversification. Real diversification is, maybe having a business over here, having some real estate there, maybe having some precious metals, investing in yourself, increasing your knowledge, increasing your network. That's diversification, and that's the real strategy for wealth. To get that time back, if you define it the way we do, and you should. And so, no, super important to understand what an asset class really is, what diversification really is, what it can be. Again, we're not going to fight against the traditional financial guidance and how they define those things, but true freedom comes from when you define your things yourself and when you choose what things can mean. Um, and I'll put a comment up here from Jared since he's been listening to us. And actually, I was going to put one up, but my screen reset and I lost his comment. He said, talking about coming up with a new phrase for net worth. He wrote netted worth. Your netted worth that's been caught in a net. It's like your real estate. That I thought that was pretty smart. That's funny.
Yeah.
But no, thanks for the comment, Jared, of course, and joining us as always. But yeah, man. No, I think that's a good overview for the concept of growth, because the bottom line is that's that's what gets people jazzed up. That's what gets the motivation. Hey, where's the opportunity? Where can I get rich? Because we've been told this American dream thing, and with the way the media and movies have always been, we want to chase something, and that's the opportunity today. It's never been easier to participate in stuff if you start to take control over what things like diversification and risks really are in your life, not what you've been perceived is for everybody in the 9 to 5 fixed income, work for your entire life, hopefully save for retirement, hopefully the government doesn't take too much taxes, hopefully social security's there, all those types of things. Or we can do real diversification, take that stuff off the table and take full control. If you're in control, what would you need to diversify yourself? Like it's your it's your own life. And that's, I think, what the opportunity for especially for veterans in America in 2021 going forward, this next decade really is. It can be that and really the big mission behind US Vet Wealth is to get more veterans thinking that way, because I believe, I know it for a fact, that's going to help end this veteran suicide epidemic, this depression, this lack of sense of purpose, because guys are miserable just getting a paycheck. Not many of us truly identify with, oh, thank God I put in my 80 hours this week. I loved it. And I'm getting a nice paycheck. But I'd like to spend more time with my family, but got the good job. That type of mindset, I think, is what caused a lot of people to lack that sense of purpose. And it can get worse. I know I was one of them for a while. I just thinking I did all the right things, and I grew my opportunities. I put money in the stock market. I did all the things I was supposed to do. And why am I miserable? Why am I not happy? So I'm glad you hit on that point of happiness earlier. And it's like, you want to be a magnet, and the people who only attract those to them because they're wealthy and rich, um, it's not going to be as fulfilling. And so that's a big part of what we're doing here. So I really appreciate everybody listening and joining us. Trevor, you got anything else for today?
No, I'm just glad I think we actually kept it to about 30 minutes this time.
Hey, it's our show. Do whatever we want. But no, I mean,
Yeah.
I think as we roll out these episodes, this is going to turn more into kind of a bantering talk show, which we did a lot of today, and that's really what I want it to be. Of course, we've talked
Yeah.
about this, and getting the topics out is a way. I mean, for those of us who are watching, listen to this or watching this down the road, that's the opportunity. What we're doing here is practice. We're learning how to do podcasting, YouTube, how all the technical aspects of it work, not to mention communicating, having something to talk about. Do we want to invite people on? There's a networking aspect to it. So it really gets fun, but that's the skill set development. And where it goes is up to you, the listener, the viewer, because as we get more feedback and as we're working with clients and they have various things we want to talk about, we're gonna shift in that direction. But till now we want to hit on all the education type topics as we're building out our curriculum for what we think is the 2.0 version of finance. And all the standard stuff that's out there, it's just been rewritten over and over again. You can buy a financial advice for veterans book or blog today, and it's not going to look a whole lot different than it did 10 years ago. And nobody's fault. We've all been told the same stuff, but we got to remember what this show is all about is a lot's changed in the last 10 years, let alone 5 years, let alone 20 years. And if we're talking about finances and stuff in any capacity, if it's similar to pre 9/11, that's ridiculous because we didn't have iPhones back then. And so we got to take into account, I think the biggest risk is paying attention to the economy we're truly in. And that's how all evolutions and societies evolve. One generation is going to get left behind and they die off, and the new one will take over. But if our mission is to help the current veterans, then we got to wake each other up and say, listen, this is going to move us right by. If whatever we thought we were going to get that nice pension, that cushy post-military job, when we signed up for service 20 years ago, if we're still thinking that way is going to make us happy and fulfilled, that I believe is the true risk for our community. But I'll get off my soapbox on a Monday morning.
You're good. I like that. Well, I want to start having more guests come on. Like last Friday when we had, or last Wednesday rather, we had cool. Melissa Moser on. That I enjoyed having, that perspective, that third perspective on there too. But I'm looking forward to doing more of those once we, get through the meat of this military finance 2.0s.
Awesome. Well, all right, everyone. We will call it a day for now, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.
Take her easy.